Welcome back to Knowledge Resources Speaker Feature. Today we're sitting down with Samkelo Blom, who will be presenting at the upcoming HR Summit event taking place across Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Durban during September this year. Samkelo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Molweni, Dumelang, Silochile, Mandrebele. I'm looking forward to be attending this conference and just sharing practical knowledge, expertise, and skills around building inclusive organizations. Thanks, Emmy.
Thanks. So, Samkelo, you are now the founder and director of Nomadic Consulting. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and just about your career in general?
Thanks, Abby. My career started in human resources. I was also a learning facilitator as well. And then I moved into transformation and BEE. And my last role, I was a group HR executive. And then in 2018, I started, as you rightly mentioned, Nomadic Consulting. We only do three things. We focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And the way we do that work is through consulting, helping organizations. We also recruit or headhunt executive Black talent, executive managers that are African, Indian, and colored. And then lastly, we provide coaching to senior and executive Black managers. Those are the only three things we do. But our core work is diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And if I may just mention, that came out because I saw the need and the limitations to do with employment equity, where companies were saying, we can't find an Indian head of IT. We can't find an African director of finance. So that's where the headhunting part came up. The consulting part came out because once you have a person in your team who's disabled, who's Indian, who's gay or lesbian, how do you make that mix work? And that is why we spend a lot of time consulting with companies. It also links very nicely to our talk to say, now that I have the mix in my team, in my organization, how do I make it work? Thank you.
Sure. And I think that's something that companies don't even consider. I think the conversation often stops at how do we reach the quota system, or we realize we need to incorporate more diversity, but there's often not a conversation about going past that, about how can we make the team function properly in this. What have you found in the trends in modern South Africa with regards to doing that, with setting up teams that thrive on inclusivity instead of having it be just a tick box exercise?
I think in South Africa, we've done some great work, but also we must be honest, there still remain challenges. There are still teams that are not diverse. There are still teams where you're not going to find millennials. There are still teams where you're not going to find people of diverse religion or people of what the CEO of Hewlett Packard calls diverse experiences. So sometimes we tend to have people in our teams who look or think like us. Where we have transgressed, or we have transcended and have moved, when we have diverse teams, we still challenge on how then to leverage, to maximize, to capitalize on the inclusion space. So I might have diverse people in my team, but how do I make that diversity when it comes to innovation, when it comes to creativity, when it comes to business results? How do I leverage that? How do I make my team to be more inclusive? That's where the challenge is. We at Nomadic, we always make a clear distinction between corporate or also between compliance, which is what BE and EE wants, submitting report and getting a B certificate, and actual inclusion, actual transformation, making the mix work.
Now, we spoke a little bit in the pre-interview about language, and sometimes I think that's South Africa's biggest pro and con, is that we have so many languages and so many cultures for each language. And you and I had a moment before where we spoke about how sometimes that can be just almost ignored in the spirit of convenience. What's your take on that, and how can we really celebrate the differences in our cultures and language while still having an efficient business system in one language, in English, and in technically one business culture?
So my challenge with language, and again, this is the ugly part of our past where sadly we did not learn each other's languages. Sometimes we only learned English and Afrikaans. So there are men and women who work next to us who speak different languages to us. We did not learn their languages. So we don't even know how to greet them in their own language. But also language is more than Venda, more than Sotho and Zulu. Language also has got to do with discourse as well, because language has meaning. So sometimes we tend to use language that is adult to child, language that is patronizing, language that is condescending. And sometimes we tend to use a lot of jargon, language that might exclude other people because of processes and systems that we use. So I always say it does not kill to learn other people's language, more than just learning Xhosa English, but also learning to speak in a language that is inclusive, learning to speak in a language that fits every person as an adult, but also learning to speak in a language that shows appreciative inquiry, where I'm seeking to understand.
So how would you approach that? How would you take a company that isn't implementing this, who isn't speaking in a language, in a language that respects everyone or is inclusive of that, and it's not present in the culture? How would you approach a company with that culture and try and transform it into a new, more inclusive culture?
So I'm always keen to start from a positive space to say, what are we already doing that is inclusive? And the more I work with companies and the more I work with teams, you'll be amazed at what teams and companies are already doing. And Amy, we need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate that we have diverse teams. We need to celebrate the fact that we've got terms and rules of engagement. We've got etiquette. We do check on one another. And the next step is to say, which parts of our language are exclusive or where there are barriers or hinders one another? What can we learn? Can we have once a day in a month where we learn about each other's culture and background and language? What is the appropriate language for me to call you by? What does your name mean? What words do I use that might press wrong buttons? And we learn from each person in the team, even those who've worked in our team 15 to 20 years, and also those who are new, because they've also got their own language where they will say, tell me what to do, when do you want the results, and then I'm going to move on. So for me, it starts from one, let's celebrate what we're already doing. Every team, they're doing something good. And we need not to forget the good things that we're doing. And then the next step is to say, where would we like to be? What are the barriers? What are the derailers? And how do we begin that journey? Even when we run online meetings, how do we communicate with each other? Do we use the chat? And what do we say in the chat? What about people who are blind in the team, who are listening? Or how about braille? What about people who are deaf? So I'm always asking myself, what more can be done? And there are certain nuances and certain phrases that we might be comfortable to use, which might not still be inclusive of others as well. Thanks, Emily.
And do you find companies are very responsive to this, or is there still almost a little bit of a bulk when we hear the word inclusivity, or are people a lot more open to approaching it and incorporating it?
I think in South Africa, we've done very well when it comes to diversity. We even got targets that will say 40% of our managers are Black or are females. I think we've done very well. Inclusion, companies are at different continuum. There are different stages. Some companies have made progress. Some companies are still starting out. Because remember, some of these terms and nuances and processes are still new. We used to believe that just because I submit an employment equity report, just because I'm a level 2, then that means that I'm transformed. So now to take it a notch higher and say, hey, inclusion is more than having a B certificate. That is still a journey. So I'm finding that companies are at different stages. I mean, very few companies will ask us about how do we create an inclusive workspace. Very few companies will say, hang on, is our gender equity program and processes working beyond just celebrating Women's Day, which is where we came yesterday? What other practical things can we do to ensure the growth, the promotion, and also that women in our organization can also become CEOs, CFOs as well? What about people with disability? And disability is not only people on a wheelchair. What other forms of disability exist in our company, in our teams as well? So that's still a journey. So companies are at different stages in the inclusive continuum, Emmy.
So how would you, once you've embarked on this journey with a company, you've gone through this process of becoming more inclusive, do you have benchmarks that you almost set for the culture where once you've reached this, you feel like you're in a good place? Or maybe what are the benchmarks that you use for testing and measuring this?
And so some of those benchmarks is what I would like to unpack in detail during the conference as well. But to a point, we cannot embark on a journey of inclusion without having inclusive metrics. When we are inclusive, how does it look like for the finance team, for the IT team? How does it look like for running meetings? I was reading a nice article last week where they said, stop asking people if they have a voice in the team, but ask them how many times when they were speaking in meetings that they were cut out, that they were cut off. Can you see how they take it a notch higher? Because the previous was used to ask, does everyone have a voice in the team? But now they say, no. Go further to say, when we are running meetings, how many times was I cut off by my other colleague as well? So definitely in the workshop, we'll talk about inclusive metrics. And to answer your question, how do we do that? We need to define for each organization, how does a successful, inclusive organization look like? It cannot be that we say we are inclusive, yet we are losing females or we are losing people of color. And if we are losing them, what does it mean? Under inclusive organization, we'll also talk about inclusive suppliers. How do we create supplier relationships that are inclusive? Because they are also core to our diversity and inclusive journey, Emmy.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing you unpack that a lot more at the conference. What are you looking forward to from hearing at the conference and just for being in person again in general?
I'm glad that you mentioned the one about being in person. I think there's something about, we've run so many workshops online. We can never compare online interventions or engagements with in-person engagements. One, when people are in the room and they share their examples and you meet their people, that's also a richness on its own. But also, I'm looking forward to getting questions from the delegates as well, and also giving a practical toolkit on how to be inclusive. And for the first time, we're going to be presenting what we call our own Nomato's inclusive toolkit. So once I'm done with this workshop, with this presentation, Samkelo, what can I take away with me under inclusion and practically apply it? And we'll unveil that inclusive toolkit in this conference.
Amazing. Well, we're all looking forward to that a lot. There will be a link to register for the conference in the description. And Samkelo, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. It has been a very interesting and very enlightening conversation as well. I've really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Emmy. Looking forward to see everyone. Thank you.